Welcome back to Jesus and Your Mental Health and the journey of parenting. we're now going into territory unknown. You know? Well, not for you.
Not for me, but for you, yeah.
Yes.
It's coming. I'll try not to scare you.
Late teens into adulthood. You've got a teenager. You know, it's quite a journey. It's kind of a long stretch, the whole teen years, right?
It is. It is. I just exited that season
no longer
a few months ago. Yes, my youngest turned 20.
Wow.
So out of the teen years, it's long.
They don't necessarily become adults when they're not teenagers, but at the same time, you know, have you ever done any reading on how like adolescence is a relatively new
word?
That there was for a long time only like children and then adults.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a pretty clear transition event.
I'm assuming when more kids started going to college. So then you've got like further delayed adulthood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have heard that when your kids, maybe not this stage, but when your kids become adults or almost adults, that unexpectedly, it's one of the hardest. Like you think, and saving their life every day or not getting any sleep when they're babies. You might think that that's really, really challenging, and it is. But this is challenging in some unique ways. And I think many parents aren't ready for this. I think about how many people you know that have a difficult relationship with their parents or their in-laws. And so obviously it's almost everybody that I know. You know, it's like somebody, 1 out of 2 people that I know has got some sort of challenge. And so something about living your adult life, then and still relating to this group that raised you, there's a lot of difficulty there. So
yeah, and it's terrifying on the other side because when your kids are adults, they're going to decide if they want a relationship with you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? And I was just telling you, I feel like I'm in that stage a little bit where, my oldest son is recalling some things from childhood that I've said or done that were maybe hurtful or impactful. And so on this side of it, it's hard to grapple with those things, especially when you don't remember them the same way. So what do I do with that? I don't want him to feel badly at all. And so I'm right in the middle of figuring out how to, maybe hold on to this relationship. I want my kid to want to have a relationship with me, but when he's an adult, that's going to be his decision.
Right. Well, let's back up a little bit. And, your kid, let's say driver's license to graduation or learner's permit to graduation is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So it's later teen years. So some of the turbulence of going from I'm a kid to I'm almost an adult, some of that turbulence is past now, and it starts to feel like a bit more normal to be almost in the adult world,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so what shifts in parenting happen in this stage?
Yeah, so hopefully you're at the place where you can shift into more mentorship, right? Where your kids have kind of established some sort of identity. It's not fully formed yet, for sure, but they at least have some kind of foundation to build on. They are making decisions out of their own values and identity versus other people. And I'm not making every decision for them anymore. And so we really want them to be owning their lives, or increasingly between like 5 and 18, increasingly owning their life. And I will say with my youngest, we saw that shift between freshman and sophomore year of high school,
Mm.
where we didn't have to stay on top of him anymore about his schoolwork and things like that, that he was able to see the long term, like what he was doing now was going to impact where he goes to college and what opportunities were available to him and things like that. So you're wanting to help your kids shift, not just, shift from just compliance to their parents to now I am need to take on responsibility for my life and direction, with guidance and mentorship and help and resourcing from the parents. But it's like you're slowly passing over the reins, is what I would say.
Responsibility is a tough one, okay, because it by definition it is a person's internal drive to take care of things. Okay.
Right.
Like I am responsible, I'm able to respond appropriately to the things going on. How do you make a person responsible? Can you make a person responsible? I was thinking about this. I think I've always been kind of a late bloomer in certain areas, like, and one of them is like responsibility, and especially work. Okay, let's think about work. For the first, I would say close to 5 years that I worked.
Okay.
And this was like not in like a full-time career. It was like when I first started having jobs. I did not feel like I was prepared for the responsibility, like how to think like a responsible person at work. So I went into work, or I went with my boss to do whatever, with a mindset of like defense. Of like, and I was already like, this is inconvenient. I'm doing this because I have to, even though I signed up for the job.
Yeah.
And one of the jobs was I worked for Starbucks for a while back in their heyday. And,
wow.
And you can look around and see that many people have this mindset, and it is like they're the immovable object that will move if enough force is put on them. They're not thinking, okay, how do I be proactive? How do I go on offense towards what I need to do? And I can't really describe to you how that shift happened. I just know that it did at some point. And everything about work is so much different and better when you think about it that way. And I can see it in my kids. I mean, they're a little younger than this age we're talking about, but I can see it in my kids where even school, like, oh, they're all sucking the life out of me with all these assignments. Like, you just feel like everybody's taking from you.
Right.
And your job is to like hold them back and to try to escape as much as you can and get to the real stuff that's fun.
Right.
But that shift from that mindset into like let's go, let's get it. It's so much freer. And I wish somebody had told me that, I guess, as a younger person. I don't know. But even if they had, I don't know if I could have listened, or I would have listened. So
maybe. I mean, I think in general, I think you can help kids. In our last segment, we were talking about, the earlier teen years, and the teenage brain at this stage does not see down the line. It doesn't see, it's harder for them to like set long-term goals. They don't see long-term. They don't see if I, do a donut in this parking lot, what the consequences might be. But they also don't see if I work hard and do my best in this class, what might this get me a few years down the line? The brain isn't fully developed to see that. And I think that's part of our job as parents, mentors, disciple makers, is to help kids see what they can't see. And so I think you can very intentionally at these ages begin to talk with them about, what do you see? What in general do you want for your life? They may not, I don't think any kid at this stage knows what they want to do with their life completely, but you can help them start to narrow it down a little bit. What goals and dreams do they have? My son wanted to play college football. So it was really easy for us to say, okay, so let's talk about what it's going to take for you to get there. Because it isn't just going to happen. Mm-hmm. You're not just going to get to your senior year and someone's going to show up at your football game and be like, here's a scholarship for you. Come play football with us. It doesn't work that way. So we need to learn the system. We need to learn how you even get recruited. And then we need to start looking at these schools that might fit for you just based on, position and body type, like that sort of thing, right? He's not a 6'5", 250-pound kid. So, we were going to need to be realistic about where he might be able to play. And my husband was really, Sean Maxwell loves a spreadsheet. So we were able to help him look at potential schools. And then we looked at their grade requirements, their GPA requirements and the SAT requirements. And so we got a picture of what this might be like, and we worked backwards from that.
Do you think it's a good thing? Maybe it's not as popular anymore, but do you think it's a good thing to ask kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? When they don't really know?
I don't think it's a bad thing, because I think it's a very forward-looking thing. What do you think you might want to be when you grow up? What do you see out there that looks interesting to you? I would maybe ask it a little more open-ended. What subjects do you really enjoy right now? Lunch. Every time I ask a kid like that, a kid that question, they say lunch. I was like, okay, great. Maybe you want to be a chef. But no, really, is there any part of any of your classes that all of a sudden become interesting to you? Or what jobs do you see out there that you could see yourself doing? For my son, my youngest son, he was like, I don't want to sit at a desk all day. And so he started kind of just exploring what jobs might get him out from behind a desk. Both of my boys kind of have an idea of what they want to do right now. And I've no doubt, they're 20 and 22. I've no doubt that might change again, because it did for me. Mm-hmm. I went to school for architecture, did that for a year, switched and got a management degree, did marketing 1 year out of college, fell into youth ministry, did youth ministry and kids ministry for 15 years. And now I'm a marriage and family therapist. I switched a bunch of times.
Yeah.
But I think going in some sort of direction, is important in helping them discover that. There are a lot of colleges now that do I think it's called an exploratory major that you can do for your first couple years, where you take classes in a lot of different areas. And I think that's really helpful, but I think we can give our kids that a little bit earlier too. I don't think they have to wait to college till they get that.
Yeah. What practical things did you do for your boys to help them feel ownership for their own lives at this stage of life?
That's a great question. I think they had responsibilities in our home. I think that we were very intentional in talking with them about when you show more responsibility for the things that are within your control, your your room, your schoolwork, your getting places on time, the sports that you're involved in. Not that we were like, we weren't like drill sergeants about keeping their rooms clean, but we always told them this is going to be a sign to us of how you are taking care of what's entrusted to you so that more can be given. We used a lot of like parable of the talents, like when you are trusted with what you have, your borders will be enlarged.
Mm.
And so we did that with phones and social media. We did that with, being out away from us, having more independence and autonomy. So we were really intentional with enlarging those boundaries, widening those boundaries as they showed responsibility.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a difficult task, but an important one. One of the things
Yeah.
that is important, we're wanting to raise, you want to raise your kids to have their own relationship with God. And so
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
remember at this stage for me, late teens, I did a lot of exploring sort of faith wise. And I grew up in the faith, but it was a time when when I could drive, I then chose where to go to church.
Okay.
Because my
Yeah.
parents, we had sort of jumped around a couple places, and then when I started to live other places, we weren't quite as like we did everything together as a family. Well, that's a long story, but I started to choose where I would go, and then I got involved in a couple different ministry things, and boy, I learned a lot from that. Some good, some bad. And so, how do you help? How do you help and encourage faith development and response, like it's sort of that intrinsic responsibility in their relationship with God? Because obviously that's
I
something that
think,
parents are very concerned about.
yeah, totally. And I mean, I think it has to start early. Um, and I also want to say, like, I talk a lot about what I did, and I just want to be clear that I am not the perfect parent, and I don't think I did everything right. I have two amazing boys, but I don't think that I necessarily did everything right. I think there's probably a lot of things that I did wrong. And so take some of these suggestions, with a grain of salt and feed them through your own, your own judgment for this stuff. But I think we started early. Like church was just something we always did. There wasn't a question about it. We just were there, and we were intentional too about making sure our kids were in a place where they were going to learn the Bible. And in fact, we made a church move because we were the primary disciplers of all the kids and students. And we wanted more disciple makers to come around them. We wanted more voices in their lives and a more thriving program for kids and students. And so we made a church move based on that. I actually left a position working at a church to take our kids to a place where I thought they would be able to grow more. And so it was always a priority for us, and to talk about what was going on at church and what they were learning. And I mean, both of us worked at church, so they got a lot of church, but we also tried to make it fun. Obviously encouraging them to go on the retreats and different things like that. So I think putting your kids in a position where they're going to hear the gospel at church in a way that they can understand and apply it to their lives. To me, I can't stress enough the importance of a good kids ministry where there's other mature believers discipling your kids. That's very, very important. Now they've got a whole community telling them, the same things. And I think you have to make tough decisions as your kids start to grow up and get more involved with sports and all the myriad of activities they have. I mean, Sunday's not off limits anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so, really figuring out what that's going to look like. I have some people that I work with that They even just make their kids go to youth group. And I think I think that that's great. That's just what they do, and they don't really argue about it. My kids never argued about it because it was just what we did. It was woven into the fabric of our family.
Mm.
Um, and I think you also have to give them a little bit of leeway to make a personal confession and statement of belief on their own, especially when they grow up in the faith, right? We can take it for granted that it's just they've always believed, and that's just not really true. There is a point where they're going to make it their own. And the biggest thing you got to do is pray like crazy. You have to bathe your children in prayer, because when they go to college, they are going to make decisions, or if they're out of your house, maybe they're not at college, but they're out of your house, they are going to make decisions for themselves. And all you can do is give them a good foundation and pray for them.
Well, I guess maybe either way, you talk about having a community of people to help disciple kids. This age for me, teens, late teens, I had a couple of key relationships with older men that were not in my family. So what my parents did, one of the things that my dad did with my brother and I, we're not quite 2 years apart. So we would go to all the men's things that he went to, so if it was like a men's breakfast, we'd go. And as soon as we were, sort of men, but I was always drawn to, a mentor, like I wanted to spend time. So and to my knowledge, my parents didn't set that up, or maybe they did, I don't remember. But did you do that or experience any of that? Like, I think about that with maybe a little bit younger kids, middle school and whatnot. Of course, their youth leader or whatever is super important. But
Yeah,
you get older, like that influence from other people is
totally. I think we were fortunate that our kids had disciple group leaders that followed them for several years, so they were able to really develop those relationships. And in high school, some that really kind of, I would say, came after them, outside of youth group, came and watched their sporting events or reached out to them. Some of them would do breakfast with their, disciple group leader mentors. And even now, my youngest son goes to UNF, and there are a couple FCA guys that are just always inviting him. And, Sean and I have encouraged that. We're not trying to helicopter, but we know these guys. And so we've encouraged them to just stay inviting and, that sort of thing. And I don't feel bad about that. I want them to, sometimes kids need to be pestered a little bit to stay involved because there's so many things pulling at their attention. And so, yeah, I do think in general at this stage, parents can get connected with their FCA leaders, the disciple group leaders at their church. Maybe it's Young Life, and, try to make the connections, that way. Because at least in the South here, there's plenty of options for them to stay connected to people of faith. And so, but you have to be intentional about it. Again, like we said in the last segment, this is the stage where sometimes parents go hands off and they just kind of back up. And I'm not sure that's the wisest thing to do. Again, not helicopter, but like somewhere in the middle.
What would you say is the burning question or the developmental priority in this stage? Like, remember we talked earlier about, identity formation, who am I, and peer group and whatnot. Like, is the identity formation stage of this period, like, what am I going to do? Since we talked about, like, what am I going to be when I grow up, or what am I going to do? What's my career going to be? What choices am I going to make? Like, what?
Yeah, we're still in that identity formation, identity versus role confusion. But like you were saying, even more here in the later, like, high school years, it very much is what am I going to do with my life? Who am I going to be? Why am I on earth? What am I here for? Um, what are my unique skills and qualities? And I think that having in very intentional conversations with our kids about those things. We don't have to pigeonhole them. We don't have to decide for them. We don't have to live vicariously through them. But by asking open-ended kind of directional questions, we can help them explore and be thinking about what might suit them the best and introduce calling at this point as well. Not calling like you're called to a job per se, but calling, and you might be able to speak to that a little bit of, like, what is the Lord impressing upon you? How has He uniquely wired you, to live out the Great Commission in this world?
Do you recommend like personality profiles or gifts assessments and stuff like that at this stage? Because there's still some development happening, but I think at this stage you're really into that stuff because what you're hungry for is some kind of like you're saying, what's my uniqueness? What's my wire? You want to understand that, even though it's still
I'm not sure. That's a great question. I'm not sure I would do too much of that until like senior year. And again, it'll change a little bit, even senior year, their kids aren't fully developed yet. But especially if a kid is maybe floundering a little bit or really having trouble putting their finger on, what they might be good at, or, then I would say, yeah. I don't know that we didn't specifically do any of that with our boys. I think that they may have had a leadership class where they did some sort of inventory or something. But certainly couldn't hurt in that stage, especially if they're just like, I have no idea what I want to do with my life. One, I think we should normalize that, not knowing. But two, I think as adults, we can give them a little bit of direction. Hey, let's do this inventory and just see, let's distill it a little bit, like how you were wired, and maybe we'll get a little bit of more direction about a direction you could go in. I don't think it's a bad thing.
When your kids are going through the stages of approaching adulthood, it's like when they're younger, you're thinking, all right, how do I put big issues, the world, sex, danger, all these different things, try to put it on their level in an appropriate way, right? And then if they're in this stage, I say that my guess is there's probably more avoidance of that. The path of least resistance will be to avoid some of those things because because it's hard, because you can't really, you sit there and be like, here's how it is, son, can't have that conversation that way. And you also don't want to, I don't know, like, how do you have good conversations around the big issues of life? Like, hey, don't do drugs, or, don't sleep around and all that kind of stuff. Like, obviously there should be some foundation there prior to this, but how does that conversation keep going?
Yeah, well, I think that's the biggest thing. What you just said, there needs to be some foundation. Like if you want to sit your 15 or 16-year-old down and talk about sex for the first time, you're way behind, and they've already been schooled by their friends in the world. So you're too late, but you still should have some conversations. I'll say that. I don't know that we talked about this a ton in the other segments, but I think you need to start really early talking about, especially about sex, when they're really early, really young. You can talk about body autonomy, right? About private parts and who gets to see them and who doesn't get to see them, and what you do if someone, touches them who's not supposed to touch them. Like, those are really important, getting kids used to understanding their body, naming the parts clearly. Because you're protecting them, you're putting them in a position where they can talk, openly if something has happened to them. So kind of destigmatizing those conversations, making them more comfortable. But a lot of times I think it happens kind of naturally. Like your kids see a pregnant lady and all of a sudden they want to know how that baby got in there. Right. And so like you said, you have conversations, at an appropriate stage, but now we're talking about the stage where they're going to start dating, right? They're going to start spending time with the opposite sex or the same sex, but hopefully the opposite sex. And they're going to be in, more, romantic relationships. And so you do have to have more direct conversations about boundaries.
I grew up
practical.
I grew up in a don't date kind of a camp. And, there's some benefits there. You stay away from romance as a teenager, then there's a lot of problems you can stay away from. But then I also felt like when I did start dating, I really learned so much about myself and about the kinds of relationships that worked well for me, that I think many of my friends and people close to me who grew up similar to me ended up marrying like the first person they dated, or you know what I mean? Like, so thoughts on, there's some positive self-discovery and healthy relationship discovery that happens through dating. So how do you navigate that without falling off on either side, if that makes sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. You don't want to be too rigid or too permissive, for sure. I mean, we had some rules like, until you are, we didn't say you absolutely cannot date until you're a certain age. We didn't do that, but we did promote opposite sex friendship. I think friendship is having friends, when you're kids, having friends that are the opposite sex is very important. So you're laying the foundation that the opposite sex is first and foremost a friend. Mm-hmm. And how do we treat friends? So a lot of it for us with boys was teaching them how to treat girls. My husband was very intentional about that, modeled that, made it very explicit for them. They learned to protect girls. They learned to open the door for me. They learned how to kind of I was the girl in the house. So they learned how to kind of take care of me, and they've continued that. And then I think, as they start to have boyfriends and girlfriends, there's going to be some boundaries around that. Before they can drive, it's a whole lot easier to have those boundaries. Our rule was you're not going to be alone with a girl, until you're 16, basically, until you can go and pick her up, take her on a date, and take her back home. And so, she can come over, you can go over there, but we're going to make sure that there are parents around. And that's just the boundary. We're not going to be sitting there watching you like a hawk, but we're in and out of the room and, those sorts of things. We tried to open our house to gatherings for our kids' friends. We tried to be that house where if they all come over here, we're going to order pizza and Cokes and, you're going to have a great time in a supervised environment. And I think then by the time they started like dating and taking girls out, we had a curfew, and I think my husband and I would both say, I think we laid a foundation that we were real clear on how they were going to treat this girl. Mm-hmm. We didn't have any hesitation about letting them take a girl on a date because we had laid that groundwork for them already. Mm-hmm. And I think that we continued to have conversations about don't do it because, she could get pregnant or this or that. Again, we had conversations that were an overflow of our values and beliefs, mm-hmm. right? You guys say that you you're a follower of Jesus. So what does that mean? What does that mean sexually? What does that mean in friendships? What does that mean in your character and your values and how you see the world and live and breathe in the world? So at this stage, everything was flowing out of not just who we say you are, but who you have said. Because by this point in our household, both of our boys had made professions of faith and were baptized. Mm-hmm. And so, and even still to this day, the conversations come from, this is who you said you are. Mm-hmm. And I want you to evaluate whether or not you're living in that out of response to what God has done for you and what you've said you believe. Mm-hmm. Kind of the same things we would ask ourselves when we're self-evaluating.
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes, a friend of mine says, is that my job is to help put it, I think he's talking about it with like his team, but I want to help them fail or give them permission to fail, but just not catastrophically. And so it's like you're setting these environments up where it's just like, okay, it's not like you're looking for perfection, but there's enough freedom and then enough safety for growth to continue.
Yeah. Yeah. I want them to fail in my house.
Right.
Before they get out into the real world.
Right. Yeah. How do you know when to step in? You're seeing some missteps. How do you know when to step in and help versus let them figure it out?
Oh, that's a broad question. I think that's very, very nuanced. You want them to experience natural consequences of their behavior, right? So you don't always want to step in and prevent those natural consequences because sometimes those are the best teachers. Mm.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to think of some examples of that, maybe stuff in school, a lot of kids will fall into kind of cheating and things like that. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they need to experience the natural consequences of that or of failing.
Yeah.
Failing a class. And that one's real hard for parents to let their kid fail a class. They'll go talk to the teacher on their behalf. They'll hire tutors. They'll beg, borrow, and steal so that their kid doesn't fail a class. And sometimes failing a class or even failing a grade and having to repeat, is a really important lesson. Now, I would say being reckless with like your driving, no. You got to step in.
Yeah.
Substances, got to step in.
Mm. Yeah, like think about what the consequences are. Let's play it out a little bit. Physical danger is hard to just leave it alone. What about money? What kind of lessons about money and financial responsibilities are important at this stage of life?
Yeah, I think learning how to work hard, at a job that's less than desirable is probably an important lesson in these years. And the job doesn't always have to be less than desirable, but if it is where you got to like get up early or work in the hot sun, that's character building, mm-hmm. right? Learning how to earn money and budget and be on, like there was a point where our kids started working and, we didn't pay for social stuff anymore. Mm-hmm. They had to do that, or we didn't just buy them everything they wanted. They had to kind of save and contribute to that. And sometimes we would do things like, you save half and we'll pay the other half, right? So we're supporting effort. I think supporting effort is really good at this stage. Investing where they've invested. But I think, learning good habits, learning how to manage, again, it's a stewardship issue, learning how to steward, what they have, learning how to work hard, Um, and those things are character building and, will help them develop good habits.
What are some common like mental health challenges, and what are some signs that it's serious, so there's this growth, I'm trying to give you all the stuff, like it's think about something like money or budgeting or school or all the choices you feel about your future. It's easy to feel overwhelmed. How much of that is, I'm sure that produces a lot of anxiety, but like how much of that is like, hey, this is normal and we got this, or like, oh, this is a real problem?
Yeah, I think it's, like you were saying, it's normal to feel a level of anxiety or overwhelm, especially around transitions. Transitioning middle school to high school, to a new school, moving out of state, losing and gaining friends. Like life is about transition. And sometimes those are the biggest difficulties that we have. And we might have a little bit of anxiety, overwhelm, or even depression, sadness, grief, when we lose something. And also lots of identity confusion. Because the world will tell you you can be whoever you choose to be. And that's actually very confusing because it's like with a smorgasbord of choices, what do I choose? What do I choose? And if I'm feeling confused or a little bit of a little bit of anxiety inside, the world will tell you, oh, but if you were this thing, it would solve everything, whether it's gender or, or sexual orientation or whatever. Like if you would just be this, I think you're this, I think you're inherently this, and that will just solve everything. And it doesn't. It doesn't solve everything just to pick what you think you feel like you are right now. And that causes a lot of trouble because these are normal transitional stages. Like this is probably better for the last segment, but especially when girls become women and they start to grow and develop, for a large majority of girls, experientially, it's not a fun transition because you're going from a girl to a woman and you want to stay a girl. Most of us don't want to develop breasts and start our periods and that sort of thing. We want to just fit in. We want to stay how we've always been. And so it's a difficult transition. And that's where that identity confusion can come in. And if these kids go to the internet, especially, they may become convinced that wrestling and that unrest that they have must mean there's some other identity. Mm-hmm. And that's really dangerous because we're taking a normal transition, a normal developmental stage, and a discomfort in it. We're exploiting it and making kids think that there's something, more profound happening rather than it's no fun to have to wear a bra. Mm-hmm. Right. That's a hard transition. And so we're taking what's normal and exploiting it to be something else. I say like the world at large. And so that's where I think, we could, like you said, we could do a whole episode just on that. But all of these things are kind of normal transitional things that happen. Now, sometimes they get bigger than what is normal, and maybe they don't pass. The anxiety doesn't pass. It sticks around. Maybe it gets worse or the depression gets worse. That's when you need to start thinking about, okay, do we need some intervention here? Do we need to talk with someone about what's happening? But there's a lot of pressure too that contributes to all of this. I mean, you can hardly get into Florida colleges anymore. The SAT scores are so high and you have to have these great grades, and there's so much performance pressure that does play out in mental health. And even sports, kids that are wanting to go on to play college sports, there's you got to do all these things and get all these gains. And like, it can be overwhelming for a lot of kids.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why it's so important to have that baseline. I mean, we have the Bible as our baseline authority, because all of these things, it's almost like they're questions or their needs or their experiences that need an answer and need an explanation. And it's wild. Like, if you don't have the baseline authority,
Yeah.
then you can just decide all these different things are the answer to that thing.
Right.
And try to justify it and prove yourself right. I mean, like, imagine if your appetite for food, and somebody said, hey, listen, you have this appetite for food, and what you need to do is go scrape the pine bark off the tree and eat it. And you'd be like, well, first, I don't know, I've never tasted pine bark, but if you were really hungry and you didn't think anything else was there, if somebody convinced you enough that was what you should eat, you might try it. And then maybe for a second, the hunger pangs aren't there anymore, but eventually it's not going to work out. You know what I mean? And so it's like, what is the answer to the thing? And the thing that the best qualified person to know the answer is the designer, so that's why of any stage of life, especially for your growing children, the designer knows the design. And so pointing people back to that is really, really good. We talked a lot about preparing for transitions. And so let's kind of wrap up talking about parents, to parents. I think parents are often not prepared for the letting go. Maybe it never gets easy, but not prepared to stop trying to control or to stop relating in a certain framework. So how do parents prepare for that? And then a sub question to this is, how important is it for parents to maintain their own interest, passion, goals outside of being a parent? Like, I think that from my observation, people who have done this well are the ones who, like, their parenting existed inside this umbrella of their life. And then as the kids launch, they just got more and more excited about their work as a scholar or a pastor or a teacher, you know what I mean? And so it's just like they were able to keep, like, the functions of their life kept going. Whereas if they had born identity solely or too much of, like, this is my life's all about my kids, then as soon as those kids make a transition to not really needing you anymore,
right.
Then you have this identity crisis and confusion. And so how do you avoid that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you just kind of said it or alluded to it, is as parents, like, that is one role that we have. But our role does not define the whole of our identity. Our identity is in Christ first and foremost. And then he's uniquely wired and gifted us to fulfill the Great Commission with our unique giftings and wirings. And if we are, our primary mission field, of course, is going to be our home and our parenting and who we raise. That's very important. But if that is the only thing that we're focused on, and when that transition happens, then it's going to be very, very difficult. And so understanding who we are in a broader sense and what we bring to the table that God has given us to steward well, I think that will help us to prepare for letting our kids go, because they will leave. And if we're not securely grounded people, that transition is going to be a lot harder. And then we could enter into kind of an identity collapse at that point. And that's not good. Same thing with your marriage, right? If you have been shoulder to shoulder, just co-parenting, and you really haven't invested in your marriage much in 18 years, what's going to happen when your kids go to school? You're going to look at this person and say, I don't even know you anymore. We've just been co-parenting shoulder to shoulder instead of getting eyeball to eyeball and really deepening our relationship together. So those are two things I would think about. You as an individual, what is God calling you to bigger picture, and making sure you are deepening your bond with your husband or wife. And then still, even if, I was the mom that did have a lot going on outside of parenting, but it snuck up on me that senior year. And senior year hit for my first son, and I just got smacked with grief, like pre-grieving almost. Just feeling like things were coming to an end, and lots of like, did I do everything I could have done well? And right. So it's hard to totally predict or prepare for that. I think, it's grief's going to hit you anyway, because it is, it really feels like the end of, a long, long season. Yeah. And it's difficult to let go, but that's the way life is. That's the way God has set it up. Mm-hmm. And so we have to know that there's good in it for sure. We have to trust the Lord and believe that we've done the best we can with what we have. Mm-hmm. And, let them go and begin to kind of figure it out while staying there for when they need support.
Mm-hmm. I don't know how this would be so much more difficult without trusting in a sovereign God. I mean, like the fact that he has a plan, loves you, loves your children even more than you, and that nothing can happen to them that he doesn't hold in his hands. And so, and that's change and loss and leaving something behind. It is just unavoidable. I mean, like you have to leave behind infancy to start being a toddler. You have to leave behind toddlerhood to be a kid. It just has to, for some reason, at some point in our lives, we stop really, really wanting the thing to come next. And then we switch to really, really wanting the thing to not go away. And, but the fundamental truth of life stays the same, is that you could not have the thing next without letting go of the thing that you've got to let go of. And just like when you're old and you're like, I don't want to die. Well, you can't have heaven without letting go of being old here. I think probably at that point you won't be so hesitant anymore. But it is hard to let go. But I think that when we know the designer and trust him and trust his plan, he's made everything in its season and everything good. Yeah,
that's such a good word. Yeah. Great. Well, let's pray for these. Let's pray for these parents.
Please.
I think that's a great note to end on. Good thing to remember. Yeah. Lord, I just thank you for giving us these blessings, these gifts from you, Lord, that we would have them for a time and be able to steward our time well. Lord, I pray for all the parents in this stage, especially for the ones right now who are facing graduations coming up in the next, month and a half, high school graduations where they are completing a season and entering into another one. I just pray for that transition, Lord, that you would just bring comfort, that you would bring comfort and wisdom to all of those parents who are in transition, and to the kids as well, Lord, that they would be able to stay connected to you, that they would be able to be firmly rooted in their identity in you as they go into a completely new environment, whether it be career or college. And Lord, We know that you have set things up this way, that we would have to leave things behind to step into new seasons, and that we know that you're good. So we can trust in that, and we can navigate the emotions that come knowing that you are good and we can trust you. Lord, we just thank you for this conversation and this time and the ability to see your goodness in the land of the living. Lord, we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thanks for listening to Jesus and Your Mental Health. If you would take the time to review and subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen, it would mean a lot to us. If you'd like more information about Rebecca Maxwell's practice, go to jesusandyourmentalhealth.com. This podcast and the information provided by Rebecca Maxwell and her guests are solely intended for informational and entertainment purposes and should not be taken as a substitute for advice, diagnosis, or treatment regarding medical or mental health conditions. Although Rebecca Maxwell is a licensed marriage and family therapist, the views expressed on this podcast should not be taken as medical or psychiatric advice. Always consult your physician before making any decisions related to your physical or mental health. If you are in a crisis, please contact the crisis text line at 988 or the National Suicide Prevention Hotline at 1-800-273-TALK, or call your local emergency services by calling 911. Join us again next time for Jesus and Your Mental Health.